where common sense is still alive. You're watching Tater Thoughts.
What's up, everybody? What's going on? What's going on? What's going on? Got that microphone working. This is Tater, Nader, Potato, whatever you want to call me. This is today's edition of Tater Thoughts. Today we got a pretty good show for you today. We're going to go over all the normal topics, you know, Trump, immigration, woke congressman acting weird, maybe a little bit of Iran. Also a really good takedown by Senator Markwayne Mullins out of Oklahoma when he's calling out the hypocrisy of the Democrats when they talk about Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. If you're watching this on YouTube, which I hope everybody is, please make sure that you like, share, subscribe. Liking and commenting is probably the best for the algorithm. I really want to blow the show back up to where it was when it was Nightcaps with Nate and even beyond. I love coming here every day, spending the time. It takes a lot of prep behind the scenes. It isn't just get on here and just start talking. I'm a talker, but I'm not that much of a talker. So make sure that you share, like, and subscribe. If you're watching this on Facebook, that's going to be only for a limited more time. I'm going to actually transition this more over to YouTube. That way I don't, what you call, cannibalize my likes and stuff from the YouTube page. I'm not trying to make money off this. I mean, if I do, great. I'm a capitalist. I'm all about it. However, really, I'm just trying to get the message out there. I think this kind of media is taking over the legacy media. The legacy media is scared to death. In fact, we have a story on that today with CNN, how the morale just sucks over there. MSNBC's following. CBS News and ABC have had to settle with Trump because Trump's the first president, Republican, to ever take him on and say, hey, you know what, you're going to give false information that's blatantly false, I'm just going to sue you. And, you know, he has all the power, holds all the strings. So that's, I think, pretty cool. So our first story of the day is big Supreme Court news out today. I want to preface this by saying I am a libertarian. I do vote mostly Republican because they are the closest to that. However, with that being said, the reason why I say that is because I believe that as an adult, you can be whoever you want to be. You want to transition to another gender and believe that there are other genders. I personally don't believe there are. I believe that there's XX and XY chromosome. It's science. It used to be the Democrats and the left were the party of science when it came to climate change. They still are, in the most part, in that case. However, when it comes to a lot of the woke nonsense, it's just crazy. It's gone too far. The American public is usually center or right of center, and even they think it's gone too far. And banning gender transition care for minors is just common sense. Donald Trump, a lot of times, he'll say, hey, we are, you know, instead of being a Republican, he is just a party of common sense. That's what we are. It's common sense. I think it was Bill Maher that said, hey, when I was 8, I told my parents I wanted to be a pirate when I grew up. Thank God they didn't chop off my leg and pluck out an eye. It makes sense, right? Common sense. So even people on the left are like, hey, we got to stop this woke nonsense. But yes, the U.S. Supreme Court today upholds the Tennessee ban on gender.
Also this, moments ago, breaking at the Supreme Court, the justices there have issued a decision on Tennessee's ban on sex reassignment medical care for minors. The Supreme Court upholding the Tennessee law that bans certain types of gender-affirming care. Let's bring in Shannon Bream on this. Shannon, it's the first time really that the High Court is considering this type of care or restrictions on this type of care for children in America.
Yeah, and this has been one of the most watched cases of the entire term because there are many other states that also have some kind of limit or ban on trans treatment for minor children. So this has gotten a ton of attention, and essentially the court's ruling 6-3. There are concurrences and breaks here and there, but the majority opinion says this. They says this case carries with it the weight of fierce scientific and policy debates about the safety, efficacy, and propriety of medical treatments in the evolving field. They say there are a lot of different studies out there. They came up during arguments, some of them saying other countries have limited or backed off these treatments for minors, but they say that's not our place, our decision.
Exactly. Follow the science is what they're saying. Follow the science. Does it have a common good for the common people? That is the threshold. Usually when these type of cases get up there, There's higher thresholds of the same idea called strict scrutiny when it gets to like race and some of those immutable, very protected categories. But like this, it's just saying, hey, does it make common sense for the common good, for the common children? There's a lot of life after 18. So when they heck, you can't even buy tobacco, even as a soldier fighting for your country, which I think is wrong as a libertarian. But until you're 21, you can't even buy a tobacco product till you're 21. But yet you can have them get puberty blockers, which stunts growth, especially in men. You can actually do gender reassignment surgeries in some cases. I know a lot of the left say, oh, you can't do that anywhere else. Yeah, you can.
To make, but essentially says our role is not to judge the wisdom, fairness, or logic of the law, but just to ensure that it does not violate the equal protection guarantee of the 14th Amendment. They said this law survives that scrutiny. So essentially concluding that it does, we leave questions of policy to the people, their elected representatives, and the democratic process, essentially saying Tennessee has passed this law. We're not going to step in. We think that it passes the constitutional muster of the 14th Amendment.
And you're seeing a lot of this with the Supreme Court, Roe versus Wade, or DOGE, really, when it got overturned. It might not be a popular thing to do, but they're returning this power to the states. We were meant to be, and this is where the European Union really has to be careful, okay? We were built kind of like that. The European Union is a collection of countries. It's just new. But you're starting to see it more and more, where the EU has encroached more and more on their state sovereignty or country sovereignty. We were meant to be 50 united countries or states. That's why we have our own legislator, our own judicial system. We have our own governors or executive branch. We have all three branches. Plus each state, most states have their own National Guard, which is their own militia. Yes, it can be federalized as we learned, right? But it was never meant to be a one-size-fits-all approach from the top down, from Washington, D.C. all the way to Washington State. Because what's good for Alabama or Tennessee may not be good for Colorado or Arizona. And so with the limited things of the Constitution saying, hey, these are what we're going to control, 10th Amendment says all other rights are reserved to the states. And what happened was, largely under what was called the Commerce Clause during the 20th century and early 21st century, where it started getting reversed, the federal government started usurping states' rights. It started with the New Deal. The New Deal, which was popular, we're coming out of depression, it was to give everybody a job, but it was actually kind of unconstitutional. And the Supreme Court at that time had decided, hey, we're going to have to strike this all down because that's not the federal government's purview. Well, the president at the time decided that he was going to, and he had majorities in Congress, said, hey, we'll just change the structure of the Supreme Court. Supreme Court is enshrined in the Constitution, but the amount of Supreme Court seats, Congress can control that with a 60, the regular vote of the Senate. Congress or the House passes 51%, and the Senate needs 60 votes, and they can literally pack the courts, as they say. They tried this. They threatened this under the Biden administration, but they can literally pack the courts, and so then if they go from, say, the current 9 justices, they can go up to, say, 11 justices, and the next 2 justices are appointed by the president in power, and if he has the Senate to confirm them, boom, now they got a new majority. So Supreme Court said, okay, and they backed down, which obviously they didn't do their job. They fell to pressure. Okay, so all this stuff is just going back to the states, and they're saying, hey, this is not a protected class per se, especially children. Let the states handle this. If they want to put a ban on that kind of care, they can do it. Same with abortion. Okay, so as long as you're not discriminating based on, sex, not gender, sex, okay, race, and those really protected classes, the states can regulate what they want. I mean, it's just common sense. It's called federalism. Look it up, federalism. That's why a lot of our Supreme Court justices that are conservative are part of what. So the Supreme Court did the right thing here. And this cuts both ways. So sometimes we're going to want something at the national level. Let's say the right-wing back in the day, in the 80s, and Falwell and Pat Robertson, they had the moral majority. And they had said, hey, nope, we're going to mandate prayer in all 50 states and all the schools. Well, one, that works well when you have a Christian majority. What happens if the Buddhists become the majority? I bet you they wouldn't be for prayer in school then. That's why the Constitution's separation of church and state is so important, right? And that's where the religious right beat me up, and that's fine. Go ahead and anytime anybody wants to get on here and debate, we can do it. I'm down with it, okay? But in that case, this same court would say no. If they didn't strike it down as separation of church and state, which they should, then they would reverse it and send it back to the states. Okay, so it's very important that we uphold federalism. And the reason why we do federalism is this. Every state, their local legislators make policy for their people. It's a lot easier for, especially back in the horse and carriage days, for people to get to Lansing, Michigan from Detroit than from Detroit all the way to Washington, D.C. to lobby Congress and their local representative. Okay, so that's one of the big things. Also, it creates a laboratory of competition. That is why states like Illinois and New York and California are hemorrhaging taxpayers because their taxes are too high. Where are they moving? To conservative states. Now, unfortunately, a lot of these people are parasites, and they flee high taxes, high regulation, lack of freedom, and then they go and they decide, you know what, I'm going to vote that in here, which is really stupid. That's why you have signs in Texas, don't California my Texas, right? I see it a lot here in Myrtle Beach. Myrtle Beach is all transplants of New York, New Jersey, Philly people, mostly people from the Northeast coming down here because they like the slower way of life, the lower taxes, the cheaper cost of living. Heck, in New Jersey, you're not even allowed to pump your own gas. They think you're so stupid, as your politicians think you're so dumb in New Jersey that you can't even pump your own gas. You actually have to have somebody pump it for you that's got a license to do it. So that's the laboratory of competition. You can vote with your feet and your tax dollars. And that's the beautiful thing. It's not a bad thing. Federalism is a good thing. Whoops. Where am I going? Oh, where am I going? There we go. So, next up, let's talk a little bit about Iran. I got some pushback from a family member who might be on the show. He was on the show last time. It's my twin brother. And he said, hey, you're wrong. You're being a neocon on Iran. I don't think I am. There are certain things where we don't want to go and we don't want regime change in Iran. Let the people do that. But there are certain red lines that we cannot cross. The Islamist leadership of Iran believe in their version of what we call the end times in Christianity. And with that, they think that if they destroy the state of Israel, it will usher in their Messiah in their second coming. Or the first coming. I don't know how they but they're going to usher in this Messiah that's going to create Islam all over the world. So they would not hesitate 1 minute if they get their hands on a nuclear weapon to not only threaten Israel, but to actually do it. And us. I mean, what's his name, Khamenei or whatever the Ayatollah is, the supreme leader, has literally just recently and all throughout the last 30 years, 40 years have called for the destruction of two main countries, the United States and Israel. They are vehemently against it. And Israel did the right thing, and they're going in, and we're doing the right thing and supporting them. And I think the only thing we're going to do is go in because we have the big bomb that can actually go through the bunker and destroy that thing. That's probably the one thing we're going to do. Whether the Ayatollah is assassinated, I don't know. That's up to Iran. But I think we're handling this largely in the right way. This is not the same as Iraq, where we're going to go in and try to change regimes and be an occupying force and build them in the way of the United States, which doesn't work anywhere in the Middle East because it's not in their culture. They believe in Sharia law, some less extent, some more extent. And it's kind of the same here. A lot of Judeo-Christian ethics and the Ten Commandments actually guide our law. So we have a sense of Sharia law too. We have moderate countries like Jordan, Turkey before Erdogan, where they're pretty secular. Actually, Iraq was pretty much a secular country. We went in there and just messed that all up. Yeah, Saddam Hussein was a despot and mean to his people, but that was their people's business. Same here. In Iran, I think we should leave it to the people to rise up and form a new government like they did when they made the mistake of kicking out the Shah. But we do need to possibly support Israel with one bombing mission, and that is to destroy that nuclear plant. We need to set them back. And they're weak right now. Nobody is smarter and better than Israel and how they have slowly dismantled Iran with the pager thing. Look it up, or the walkie-talkies that blew up. They basically destroyed the Houthis, Hamas, and what are the other ones in Lebanon? Hezbollah. Okay, destroyed them because Iran has never won a war in its history, I don't think. So what did they do? They went to proxy armies that they were funding. They're the largest sponsor of state-sponsored terrorism in the world, and they dismantled that. And then they've come in and they own the skies of Iran right now. This is a prime opportunity not to take out their government. If Israel decides to do that, that's their business, not ours. That's on them. But to eliminate their entire defense, and that's what they've pretty much done so far. And with that being said, the people can now rise up, because I'd say 8 out of 10 people in Iran do not support their government. They want freedom. That's why they're always out there. The women are out there without their veils on or whatever, the hijabs, and they're rising up against their own government. They want to be a free. They're smart people. The Persian Turks, very smart people. They should be self-ruled. They don't need a dictatorship, and they would probably become. So now, since Russia is a staunch ally of Iran, and they're not really. Russia is loyal to no one but themselves. They're like China. That's why they allowed Syria to be taken over. Syria was a staunch ally, right? But Russia is a paper tiger. Russia is hurting right now because Russia has overspent themselves, and they bit off more than they could chew, really, with the Ukrainian war. They did not think that this little country of Ukraine was actually going to stand up to them, and they did. They have. Now, is it a winning war? No. In the long run, Ukraine will lose. That's why they need to listen to Trump, get into some peace talks, come to a concrete agreement, and hopefully it gets enforced. Okay? That's kind of our fault, too. Bill Clinton talked them out of their weapons, said, hey, Ukraine, you give up your nuclear weapons when the Soviet Union broke up, and we will protect you. And what did we do? We've turned our back on them, essentially, because we're tired of wars in our country. We're tired of being in wars, and that's largely because of the neocons of Bush and Cheney and the old Republican Party. So now Russia warns the U.S. over Iran. It sounds like it's dark, but all Russia's really saying is you're going to destabilize the region, all the other talk. What happened was Iran called Russia and said, hey, I thought you had our back. We had a strategic alliance. You know, we've been feeding you oil and helping you with these sanctions that the United States put on. And you know, we're on your side, and Vladimir Putin's probably just doing the bare minimum. And all this is, by the way, if you ever want free news that's pretty fair and accurate and not biased, it's Newsweek, believe it or not. So, Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov has warned the U.S. that direct military assistance to Israel could radically destabilize the Middle East. It comes as the region faces an escalating air war between Iran and Israel. Newsweek has reached out for comment from both the Kremlin and our State Department. Probably didn't do it. They got no answer. Why it matters? It's the war is unfolding against a backdrop of long-standing hostility and strategic rivalry in the Middle East that's been going on forever. This is why we have to stay out of the Middle East as much as possible, but we can assist where needed in a very limited capacity. Okay, because these people are going to fight forever, and when they're not fighting amongst themselves, they have tribes within their country fighting. That's what the civil wars in Syria was all about. Okay, so bottom line, that's probably why we don't want to topple the regime currently and let the people do it, because if we do it, we're going to cause civil war. We're going to cause civil war, and Iran's going to be a mess for years and years to come. Thank God they don't have nuclear weapons, and that is the red line that Trump said you're not going to cross. And unlike Obama, when he says there's a red line, all right, moving on to our next topic. This guy right here, I really like him. I like these new crop of Republicans. They're no hold bar. There used to be a Republican Party was so weak to the Democrats because they had this legacy media that beat them up. Well, now we don't have to worry about that because we have media like Tater Thoughts or all over the internet. Great channels. You know, even Joe Rogan has really moderated the media landscape. In fact, it was Trump's son Barron that got Trump to get on this new media and win the election. And then you had people up in Canada like Pierre Poilievre, who was the conservative candidate, who Trump kind of did torpedo But he refused to get on Joe Rogan and other shows, and it was stupid. And he lost to a very simple elbows up message. You can go read about that somewhere else. But I do like how we are calling out the hypocrisy now, and the media and the Democrats have beat up poor Pete Hegseth when really pound for pound he's 10 times better than his predecessor, Lloyd Austin. Lloyd Austin was a weenie, weak. I would say that he was just following the footsteps of Biden, but really we all know that Biden was not really there. So I don't know who really was the president. And that was another hearing that was on the Hill today. I'm not covering it today, but they had a hearing on the Hill about Biden's decline, and all the Democrats boycotted it. Because, Democrats love to protest and boycott everything. It's silly. They're the most childish grown-ups I've ever seen in my life because they operate off emotion, not logic.
Talk about accountability. I wonder who was held accountable for the disastrous withdrawal out of Afghanistan, where 13 soldiers died, and we left thousands of Americans behind underneath Secretary Austin's lead. Did one person get held accountable during that time? I don't know of anybody that got held accountable for Afghanistan withdrawal. But let's talk about that. And let's talk about the turmoil to which my colleagues on the other side of the dais wants to talk about. Let's talk about that turmoil. Underneath Secretary Austin, who was a general, by the way, you had the lowest morale measured in our
All right, so that first point is huge. Remember, they beat up Pete Hegseth because he was a major in the Army Reserves or National Guard. And then we've had defense secretaries who never served at all. But he wasn't an insider, so that's why they're all mad, because he actually goes in and cuts these lucrative contracts out and say, hey, no, that's waste, that's fraud, that's abuse. And he's actually in there leading. Actually, they're having beer with the troops, not the generals. He actually goes down to the lowest enlisted members and talks to them. General Austin, later Secretary Lloyd Austin, Secretary of Defense, was a weak weenie. I don't know what my full screen.
Military history, you had retention,
we'll get to it.
Absolutely disastrous. You had recruitments that wasn't even meeting lowered standards that you guys lowered. But let me see the contrast now. We have the highest morale that's been measured in decades in the military. We have recruiting numbers that are exceeding expectations that we've had. We have our enemies that fear us once again, and our allies that love us because they can trust us. But that's not the narrative, Secretary Hegseth, that our Democrat colleagues want to draw. But how short-minded is your memory? It was just a few months ago that you was supporting a commander-in-chief that you guys were covering up for or flat out lying about. Who was in charge? And that was a commander-in-chief.
Exactly. Auto-pay.
Oh, but let's not talk about that. Instead, let's just point fingers at something that fits a narrative. You want to talk about war powers or the fact that during our reposturing in the Middle East against Iran, which would have never taken place if our colleagues on the other side would have held the administration accountable while they were giving billions of dollars back to Iran, and knowing good and well during the briefings that they were actually trying to develop a nuclear weapon, but we turned a blind eye to that, and now the mess that was created by the Biden administration, this administration, or the Trump administration, and the leadership of Secretary Hegseth is simply trying to clean up. But forget about the past. Let's talk about this. Oh, let's talk about reposturing, by the way. And was it Secretary of the Navy, Del Toro, that came to us and said that he was fighting the largest naval battle since World War II? Did anybody in this dais authorize that? That was his words, who sat right there where Secretary Hegseth was, and I laughed. And I said, I didn't think the Houthis had a navy, so why are we fighting a naval battle there? And did you guys complain about it? Did you guys say one thing about it? Nope. You just sat there. Because hey, it didn't fit your narrative, but this one does. And anyone want to start talking about the National Guard and the Marines? Didn't President Eisenhower deploy troops or federalized troops in Arkansas in 1957 and also deploy the 101st Airborne because the governor then refused to protect civil rights and personal property? Yep. What about President Kennedy in 62 and 63 that also did it because Mississippi and Alabama refused to do the same thing? And so since the governor at that time refused to protect citizens and the property, he federalized the National Guard. Oh, let's think about 65 too, because LBJ did the exact same thing. But that's history. But yet it's extremely important to the context of what you guys are claiming to be done here. But that doesn't fit the narrative that you guys want to put out there.
Isn't it refreshing? It's so refreshing to have somebody who can actually speak and tell the truth and actually articulate a point. Gone are the days of Mitch McConnell looking like a Muppet and all these old school people that just would never. I remember I used to yell at George W. Bush because he'd make a policy, but then he would never go out and defend it. Like Trump's out there all the time defending his policies and making a case for it. And Bush would always say, oh, that's beneath the dignity of the office. Well, that's why you left with a 13% approval rating and we got smashed. I mean, that and our economy crashing thanks to Fannie and Freddie and the left forcing loans in bad neighborhoods. But that's beside the point, a whole nother issue, a whole nother day. But people like him, it's refreshing that they can actually articulate their point. And it's refreshing that we have YouTube that can actually put this stuff out there. These little hearings on the Forbes channel actually get more views than CNN does all night. So it gets the message out there. All right, so going with the legacy media dying, absolutely dying. CNN morale is really grim as network faces a corporate split. Apparently, their ratings have sucked so bad that their parent company is now saying, hey, we're done. We're going to split it off. Word is that even Anderson Cooper's out looking for a new job. And a lot of them think that they're going to do what Megyn Kelly did and start a very successful YouTube channel and podcast and make millions. But most people are just tired of hearing them because it's just an echo chamber of the same thing. Because their message is no different than ABC, CBS, NBC, MSNBC, New York Times, Washington Post, and the whole legacy media that has done nothing but be educated by these elite schools, these journalists, by very liberal leftist Marxist type professors who hate America. And with that, what are they learning? What are they reporting? Junk. The same old stuff. Anti-Trump derangement syndrome, just craziness. So CNN staffers are bracing for impact as the network faces yet another corporate restructuring by its parent company, which is Warner Brothers. Used to be Time Warner. Warner Brothers Discovery. Discovery Channel, and then they got together. Fueling unsettling morale in the newsroom, I'd say the mood remains really grim. One CNN staffer told Fox News Digital, people are uncertain. They should be. You put out a crap product. It's been declining and declining and declining. And what do? Instead of moderating or even moving a little to the right and not allowing like News Nation to come in, which is a growing news channel, or Newsmax or Fox News to continue to dominate all the ratings, what do? They continue to just do the same old stuff because they are so ideologically bent on the left that they cannot help themselves. On their most fairest show, I forgot what it's called because I never watch it, where they have that one guy who's very, very sharp. I forgot his name, Scott something maybe. Anyways, he's the one and only conservative on the entire panel all the time. I mean, they could count Anna Navarro being on there, who's also on The View, but she's not really conservative. She used to be a Republican. So did Michael Steele, who's over at MSNBC. He used to be the chairman of the Republican Party. That's what was wrong with us. And now he's a diehard leftist at MSNBC. But all these people, their ratings are dropping because they've experienced Trump derangement syndrome took over. Trump lost to Biden, which was probably the best thing for our country because we got 4 years of Biden and Kamala Harris to show the contrast between the two visions. And look at it. We went from strength to weakness, prosperity to poverty, a semi-closed border to a wide open border, and now brought them back in. We're getting prosperous again. We've taken on China. We have taken on the woke establishment. He put in a great cabinet. We're doing good. Our country is on the right trajectory, regardless of what the media has to say about it. We are on the right trajectory. And CNN, you deserve to fail. You had your chance. You should have learned. Any other business, because that's what they are, they're a business, would have fired everybody a long time ago if their stock or their value was going down so far. But no, not the media. They'll sit there and they will double down on their failed policies and continue to bleed viewers and money and revenue and just die on their own little hill as if it's going to change. What's the old saying? The definition of insanity is doing the same. Now this next topic really gets my goat. We have a weenie government over there in California, and they're so mad. Now these are the people of masks. They love masks, but now they're against ICE wearing masks, and ICE has to wear masks because their families are in danger doing their job thanks to the media and them, the left. And what do they want to do? Legal analysts, well, California Senate Bill 627 aims to ban police masks in the state, raising federal authority questions, and it applies to federal agents working in the states as well. Well, come on. That's not going to work. The federal government makes a rule that says, hey, ICE must wear masks. Guess what? That rule overdoes their state law because they don't have authority.
Democrats want to bar police officers from hiding their identities. Let me explain. Following the No Kings Day and ICE protests in California, new legislation is being proposed by a Democrat state senator that would make it a misdemeanor for police officers to conceal their identities. Law enforcement officers are public servants, and people should be able to see their faces, see who they are, know who they are. Otherwise, there is no transparency and no accountability, said State Senator Scott Wiener, a Democrat of San Francisco. The No Secret Police Act was introduced on Monday, June 16th by Wiener and Assembly Public Safety Committee Chair Jesse Adagin, a Democrat of Oakland. The bill would prohibit law enforcement officers operating in California from hiding their identities, such as by covering their faces. A key goal of the legislation is transparency, requiring officers to display clear identification, including name tags or badge numbers. The proposal is a direct response to recent protests in Los Angeles. What we have been seeing in the last few weeks are law enforcement, some local, some federal, who are wearing masks to completely hide their faces while they are carrying out deportation and other enforcement activities, said Edagin. The legislation would also apply to officers contracted from outside jurisdictions working in California, ensuring they comply with the same standards. However, opponents argue that the bill may not withstand federal legal challenges and could endanger officers' safety in the digital age. Bruce Thomas, a retired sheriff's deputy and law enforcement expert, told ABC, with the advent of social media, there are certain bad actor groups that will target law enforcement and even public officials to identify them online and threaten their loved ones. What do you think of the No Secret Police?
So yeah, bottom line is you cannot regulate the federal government, the federal agents on no matter what state they're operating in, especially when it comes to something that the Constitution expressly delegated to the federal agents, which is immigration control. How about supporting the law enforcement for once? How about not defunding police or spitting on Vietnam War vets when they came back? This is the same party that was in charge of the KKK, but now they're so woke. It's absolutely ridiculous. They're unhinged. I don't know how they ever win an election. Ever again. All right, that's some lighter news. Unfortunately, here's the top 20 cities known for their bedbug infestation, especially in their hotels. If you are watching this from Atlantic City, New Jersey, you are the worst. Which I believe it, because it's a filthy place. Columbus, Ohio, surprisingly second. Las Vegas, unsurprisingly third, because they have such a tourist industry. Chicago, that whole place is just a bed bug. Dayton, Ohio, Wichita, Sioux Falls, New York. Number 9, Philadelphia. 10, Tulsa, Oklahoma. Good news if you're from Minneapolis, where I used to live, or Lansing, or Detroit, where I grew up around. You're at the bottom of the top 20, but you still made the list. So, here's the scary thing about bed bugs. Once you get them, you're always going to feel like you have them because it's such a traumatizing event. They leave big welts. Female bed bugs can produce around 3 to 5 eggs per day, but can lay up to 12. I mean, they reproduce. Robert Fryer, CEO at Spada, said you can go from 2 bed bugs to thousands in the space of months. Oh, and by the way, you can put your stuff in a bag, kind of like lice treatment or anything like that, but they can live without food for a long, long time. Food or water. I mean, they're known biologically and evolutionarily, they're probably they're known as one of the first parasites to infect humans. So what do? If you get them, you're screwed. But you can call a professional. Don't go on Google. Call the pros. Most of them will mix two very hard insecticides that were banned for a while. I think they brought them back. And since they're so resistant and so hard to kill, they actually have to mix the two insecticides together to make sure that they can kill them. I've seen some places in Minneapolis, over in the immigrant areas, the Somali immigrant areas, and the Hmong area, they had a huge infestation when I was there. And I went over to, I was recruiting, and I went to an applicant's house, and I didn't go in, thank God. But they had the whole thing, and they had to heat the whole house up to over 200 degrees, right, to try to kill them. Which means one way to help is to wash immediately all your bedding and clothing, worn or taken to a hotel room or like an infested place, because they can come back in your luggage. They can come back on used furniture. Never buy used furniture, especially mattresses, which should go without saying. They literally latch on and then, you know, get one or two in your home, and like it says, they go to thousands in a month. Make sure that your washer and dryer should reach about 140 degrees to kill them. Probably the only thing that's going to reach that high is going to be your dryer. So over dry your clothing, because I think the hottest setting on most washers nowadays is about 130 degrees. One way you can do that is to get to your whatever type of I have a tankless water heater, so I know you can do it digitally, but the old school water heaters too, you can turn it up. They have sometimes you have to push it in or do some sort of override, because it's a safety feature to prevent scalding with kids in like a shower. But turn it up temporarily, wash that bedding as hot as you can get it, and then dry your clothing at the highest setting. So kind of a gross thing, something a little different than politics, I guess. All right, something a little funny here I found. You know, Chick-fil-A's closed on Sundays. What exactly do they do on Sundays? A little stereotypical, I think. Because I'm at 40 down on their day off. Other funny video clip of the day, I just saw this today, is Dave Chapelle. So it had to be very recent because he's taken on the whole Diddy thing. Nobody could tell. There's a white comedian, Larry the Cable Guy, who just had his way in the hooks that he could do, but nobody could tell a story. Like, it used to be Chris Rock, he used to be a master of this, but Dave Chapelle is the funniest storyteller ever. Like, how he just sits around smoking weed, thinking about this stuff is just hilarious.
If you get to be 55, and Puff is 55, he doesn't look old, but this nigga's paying half price at the movies. One senior Playboy. Ain't nothing wrong getting older, but if you 55 and you got 1,000 bottles of baby oil in the house, clearly, can't stop, won't stop. You're committed to the lifestyle. Because I'm 51, and I'm telling you, this is true. I can't remember a single time I ever threw an empty bottle of baby oil in the trash. I don't think I've ever finished a bottle of baby oil in my life. And we went to my mother's house tonight. She probably got the same baby oil we had when I was a little boy with the pink top. And somehow, Puffy was all the way down to the last. And having baby oil is not illegal. They don't remind you about that part. That's the least harmful thing I read in that doc. He just used the wrong lube, I think. If he used Crisco, he would have got away with it. But he just been like, oh, he likes to cook.
That guy's too funny. Well, hey, make sure that you, again, like, subscribe, share, comment. If you ever want to be on the show, I can find a way to get you on. I got to work with the technology here. I do got a new computer coming. I know I was looking at my videos yesterday. My voice is a little off of the track. Apologize. It's this dumb computer I got. But I got a brand new computer. Should be here Friday or Saturday. And if that doesn't do it, it's like a super computer. I swear. It's a gaming computer. So should be good to go there. Hey, thanks for watching.
Where common sense is still alive. You're watching Tater Thoughts.